Hey everybody, it's Ken McElroy and Daniil,
Hello.
and I'm excited to have Ziana McIntyre. Welcome to the show. So I wanted to start right at the beginning because I think a lot of people can resonate the fact that you started with $50,000 in debt, and you were financially free within 2 years. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that one issue. So, well, first of all, let's talk about how you got in debt, and then two, what was the epiphany to pull you out of that?
Yeah, so my debt track was just being the first in my family to go to college. And so we just didn't know better, really. I mean, when you're signing up for those loans, it sounds like, oh, that's all reasonable. Okay. But it's these large amounts of money that you're like, wow, I don't know how I'll ever pay that back, but sure. So I imagine nowadays it's probably 4x what I had. And I can only imagine how hard that is for people coming from really humble beginnings.
Yeah, and then so at what point did you say enough? I'm gonna now become financially free.
Yeah, so I got really inspired by Mr. Monday Mustache. He had a blog. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but around 2011 is when I first heard about him. And my road to financial, education came from some of the more basic kind of mainstream people like Susie Orman. I was reading some of her books at the beginning, but realized pretty quickly that was not going to be fast enough. And so finding Pete and his whole story, his story is around becoming financially independent by 30 and really stopping work, which so few people do. And so I was really inspired by that. And at the time, I was 26 and had no idea how I would do it, but I held this vision that, wow, if this guy could do it, maybe, just maybe I could find a way.
How did you pick the Airbnb lane?
Yeah, so it was kind of accidental, but I have been a traveler for a long time, and I had used this website called Couchsurfing back in the day, where you would stay on people's couches or in their homes for free. And so I had stayed with a lot of people and I'd hosted a lot of people. So when the idea of Airbnb came around, and I was finding it very early days, I wasn't weirded out by having someone in my house. I think that was a big hurdle for a lot of people. Like, oh, you're going to have a random person you don't know renting your bedroom. But for me, I had already done so much of that and jumped on the bandwagon really early. And that helped me get to, paying my rent for free and then eventually my mortgages. And it's all kind of happens from there. Yeah.
So did you start with Airbnb when you started? I mean, I feel like we kind of skipped something because we went from you were watching, social media and listening to different people. And then what did you do? How did you buy your first rental?
Yeah, so I started with arbitrage. So the way I heard about it was from a friend in New York City, and everything kind of happens in the cities first. But he said, I've heard about this thing, Airbnb. I'm going to go travel. I'm feeling super burnt out. And he wanted to just take a break from work and rent out his apartment. Now he had this apartment with a really expensive monthly cost and thought there's no way I can get out of this lease. How else am I going to do this? And so Airbnb came around at such a good time for him that after a year, he told me he'd made $50,000 off an apartment that he didn't own. And he was very persistent that I had to try it. And so for me, I was like, wow, that at the time was a tech salary. It was just like more money than I'd ever seen. So I thought, yeah, what's the harm? Let me just try it. And so I started with just a bedroom and an apartment I was just renting. And so nowadays they call that arbitrage, but it's just renting and re-renting, like subletting. And then it built into getting more places and then being able to eventually buy. And it just kind of grew from there.
Awesome. Now, what when you first started doing the arbitrage, what kind of issues did you come across?
Yeah, I mean, I think my first issue was just getting kicked out of a couple of apartments because it's this idea of living in fear the whole time. So the thing that I did to protect myself is I made sure all my leases had subletting in the lease. But back then, people didn't know about Airbnb. When I got started, it was 2012. So it wasn't in people's leases. Now, people are explicit about you can do this, you can't do this. But at the time, I was just, trying it out and shooting from the hip a bit. So yeah, I think that was a little bit of an issue, is just trying to find places where you felt like you could continue to do it.
Okay. And then from there, you were doing the arbitrage and then you started to save money for your own places through that?
Yeah, I was able to save up a down payment and I really wanted to own because at that time I felt so insecure about having an apartment that wasn't mine. At any point someone can say, well, we're deciding to sell or we're not going to renew your lease. And then you have to move on to another place. And so owning something felt like ultimate security. And I wanted to be, in the most right. I was kind of playing in this gray area space at that time. And I still own that property today. So yeah, it's definitely allowed me to build from there.
And how many Airbnbs do you have currently?
Yeah, so I have 12 units and not all of them are short term, but I have a mix of short and midterm. And then there are a couple long-term rentals in there too.
Are you mainly going after vacationers or any kind of different niches or anything?
Yeah, so the book is about midterm rental. So this is like more latest niche has been around 30 days or more. And the reason is that there's just a lot more regulations coming into the space. So people are feeling scared that they're not going to be able to do short-term rentals. But that line is right at the 30-day mark. And so after 30 days, you can do it in most cities. And so it's kind of this sweet spot for people where they can legally do midterm rental.
That's interesting. So I was going to ask, so is there short-term, midterm, and now long-term? Are those the three categories? And so midterm technically would be 30 days, maybe up to 6 months or something like that, because you get into 6-month leases, I guess it's considered more of a long-term, I suppose. But I guess in your case, people do go longer, right?
Yeah, so I've had people do midterm for a year. So it doesn't really matter at that point. So generally, short-term rental is anything under 30 days, and often it's 3 to 4 nights, something like that. Then a midterm rental is anything above 30 nights. It's often 3 months because we service a lot of traveling nurses, and so they often have 3-month contracts, and then they may extend. And the long-term rental is an unfurnished rental generally, and so that's kind of the different category. The other ones are furnished.
Yep. That's a good delineation there. So also, let's talk about some of the concerns, because we see restrictions with Airbnbs, the cities, the counties, the HOAs. It seems like everywhere you turn, they're a little bit under attack. And I know, in some markets, they're down a little bit. So can you talk a little bit about what's going on with the kind of the regulations and people? These are here to stay, clearly, but but there's now some policy and procedures around them.
Yeah, that's why I think a lot of people are leaning towards midterms, is that they feel just safer in that space. So when you're in the short-term rental, there are a lot more permits and taxes and just loopholes to jump through. But once you're 30 days plus, you're lumped in with a long-term rental in most cities. And so you just don't have the same things to deal with. So it just ends up being a lot easier. I do think that things change very rapidly these days. I'm not sure if it's just the economy and the trends in real estate or if it's because of social media, but there was a huge trend towards short-term rentals about, 2021 was its absolute peak. And then a lot of people have been kind of moving away from that. It seems like a lot of people have moved into the midterm rental space. So I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen next, if people are going to go into the long terms now and go back to the basics.
Yeah.
But it definitely feels like there's more real estate investors than there ever have been.
It sure feels like that. So what's the difference in the pricing from, because it's still furnished and it's now you just have somebody there longer. So what's the difference between a short-term and mid-term as far as cash flow?
Yeah, so it depends who you are using as your tenants. So if you're doing nurses, they're going to be paying the least amount. They are really budget conscious. If you're working with digital nomads or business travelers, they might pay a bit more. But really where people are making the most money in the midterm rental space is either through corporate government rentals or insurance placements. So if someone has burst pipes in their house and it goes through the insurance company could pay 2 to 5 times what a long-term rental would pay. So it can be incredibly lucrative, but most people just work with nurses. And at that point, it's only really like 1.5 times what market rate would be.
Thanks for being on. We really appreciate it. Where can people go to get your book?
Yeah, Bigger Pockets. Biggerpockets.com/30-day stay is the best place to get it. And then, yeah, you can find me there, but also on Instagram and my website, Ziana McIntyre. Everything is just my name.
Awesome.